Welcome to NZ Pocket Guide, New Zealand's largest travel guide. Visit nzpocketguide.com for thousands of tips, hidden gems, and ways to plan the perfect trip in New Zealand. This is a readout of an article available for free on the website. Check out the link in the description and let's get started. How much does it cost to travel New Zealand? A complete guide to the New Zealand travel cost. How much does it cost to travel to New Zealand? Well, the answer is different for everyone depending on what type of transport they take, how many people are in the group, the type of activities they do, and whether they self-cater or eat out. In this New Zealand travel budget guide, we've compiled the average prices for every single aspect of your trip. That way, you'll be able to make a note of the prices that apply to your trip to curate your own New Zealand travel budget. Budgets for traveling New Zealand. We can't stress enough how everyone's budget will be different for traveling in New Zealand. That's why we strongly encourage you to look at the prices in the below guide to determine what prices apply to your trip so that you can budget more accurately. Nevertheless, because we know that many of you like the average cost for a trip to New Zealand, here is an example of a New Zealand travel budget. Car rental, incorporated fuel, 90 New Zealand dollars per day plus private room, 90 New Zealand dollars per day plus food, self-catering and restaurants, 50 New Zealand dollars plus activities, paid and free, 100 New Zealand dollars equals 330 New Zealand dollars per day. How much does it cost to go to New Zealand for 1 week? 2,310 New Zealand dollars. How much does it cost to go to New Zealand for 2 weeks? 4,620 New Zealand dollars. How much does it cost to go to New Zealand for 3 weeks? 6,930 New Zealand dollars. How much does it cost to go to New Zealand for 1 month? 9,900 New Zealand dollars. The cost of transport in New Zealand. The cost of transport to get around New Zealand depends on what type of transport you've chosen. If you haven't picked a way to get around just yet, start with our What is the best way to get around New Zealand article. The cost of transport is also determined by the seasons, with summer showing the highest prices while winter offers the lowest. Get a more detailed transport cost breakdown in the cheapest ways to travel around New Zealand on nzpocketguide.com. Otherwise, the below prices give you an idea of the cost of traveling in New Zealand. Car hire per day, 30 New Zealand dollars to 150 New Zealand dollars. 2-berth campervan hire per day, 60 New Zealand dollars to 260 New Zealand dollars. Petrol per litre, 0.3 gallons, 1 New Zealand dollar and 90 cents to 2 New Zealand dollars and 20 cents. Diesel per litre, 0.3 gallons, 1 New Zealand dollar and 40 cents. Road user charge, diesel tax per 1,000 kilometres, 621 miles, 62 New Zealand dollars. Vehicle hire one-way fee, free to 250 New Zealand dollars. National coach bus per 4-hour trip, 30 New Zealand dollars to 80 New Zealand dollars. Hop-on hop-off bus national pass per year, 1,000 New Zealand dollars to 2,000 New Zealand dollars. Guided bus tour per 10 days, 2,000 New Zealand dollars to 10,000 New Zealand dollars. Second-hand car, 15 plus years old, 2,000 New Zealand dollars to 5,000 New Zealand dollars. Second-hand 2-berth campervan, 15 plus years old, 3,500 New Zealand dollars to 15,000 New Zealand dollars. Domestic flights per one-way, 50 New Zealand dollars to 240 New Zealand dollars. National train per one-way, 100 New Zealand dollars to 260 New Zealand dollars. City bus travel per zone, 3 New Zealand dollars and 50 cents. City train travel per zone, 3 New Zealand dollars and 50 cents. Taxi fare start tariff, 3 New Zealand dollars. Taxi fare per kilometre, 0.6 miles, 3 New Zealand dollars. The cost of accommodation in New Zealand. The price range on accommodation in New Zealand is wide, with cheap campsites to luxury lodges being available. Below, we have given the prices of accommodation that most travellers in New Zealand use. Hostel dorm bed per night, 27 New Zealand dollars to 35 New Zealand dollars. Hostel or holiday park double room with shared bathroom per night, 80 New Zealand dollars to 90 New Zealand dollars. Hostel, motel or holiday park ensuite double room per night, 90 New Zealand dollars to 120 New Zealand dollars. Motel self-contained unit per night, 140 New Zealand dollars for 2 people or 150 New Zealand dollars to 250 New Zealand dollars for 4 people. Hotel room per night, 160 New Zealand dollars double or 200 New Zealand dollars to 350 New Zealand dollars family. Family apartment or holiday home per night, 190 New Zealand dollars to 370 New Zealand dollars. Holiday park campervan powered site, 22 New Zealand dollars to 40 New Zealand dollars for 2 adults or 50 New Zealand dollars to 80 New Zealand dollars for a family of 4. Department of Conservation, DOC, campsite per person per night, 15 New Zealand dollars per adult and 7 New Zealand dollars and 50 cents per child. Freedom camping with self-contained vehicle, free. The cost of food in New Zealand. Food is essential to factor into your New Zealand travel budget. Self-catering will save you greatly on the cost of traveling New Zealand, while eating out for most meals can be expensive. See the below prices for an idea of the cost of food in New Zealand. New Zealand restaurant prices. Main meal, 30 New Zealand dollars. Cafe sandwich, NZD $5.08. Pint of beer, 8 New Zealand dollars. Small coffee, 4 New Zealand dollars and 50 cents. Fast food pizza, 5 New Zealand dollars. Big Mac, 5 New Zealand dollars and 20 cents. Typical shopping list essentials. 1 litre, 35 fluid ounces of milk, 2 New Zealand dollars and 40 cents. A dozen eggs, 5 New Zealand dollars and 40 cents. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds of rice, 2 New Zealand dollars. 500 grams, 1.1 pounds, pasta, 1 New Zealand dollar and 20 cents. A loaf of sliced bread, 1 New Zealand dollar and 20 cents. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, cheese, 11 New Zealand dollars. 100 grams, 3.5 ounces, dry freeze coffee, 7 New Zealand dollars. New Zealand fruit and vegetable prices. The price of fruit and vegetables differ across the country and between seasons. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of apples, 5 New Zealand dollars. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of bananas, 3 New Zealand dollars. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds of tomatoes, 10 New Zealand dollars. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of onions, 2 New Zealand dollars. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of potatoes, 3 New Zealand dollars. New Zealand meat prices. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of chicken, 13 New Zealand dollars. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of beef mince, 13 New Zealand dollars. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of pork, 12 New Zealand dollars. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of lamb, 19 New Zealand dollars. The cost of tours and activities in New Zealand. Activities in New Zealand range from free natural attractions and hiking trails to extravagant experiences like glacier heli hiking and bungee jumping. Jump into the types of activities and tours available, starting with our 101 Things to Do in New Zealand, the ultimate list. Otherwise, here is a quick overview of activity prices in New Zealand. Walking or hiking trails, free. Skydive from 15,000 feet, 339 New Zealand dollars to 439 New Zealand dollars. Bungee jump, 150 New Zealand dollars to 290 New Zealand dollars. Whitewater rafting, 100 New Zealand dollars to 140 New Zealand dollars for an adult and 80 New Zealand dollars to 120 New Zealand dollars for a child. Jet boat, 80 New Zealand dollars to 130 New Zealand dollars for an adult and NZD $50.70 for a child. Dolphin swimming, 110 New Zealand dollars to 160 New Zealand dollars. Whale watching, 120 New Zealand dollars to 150 New Zealand dollars for an adult and 60 New Zealand dollars for a child. Day kayak tour, 125 New Zealand dollars to 160 New Zealand dollars. Glacier hiking, 390 New Zealand dollars to 470 New Zealand dollars. Cruise in Milford Sound, 60 New Zealand dollars to 100 New Zealand dollars for an adult and 20 New Zealand dollars to 30 New Zealand dollars for a child. Rotorua Geothermal Park, 30 New Zealand dollars to 70 New Zealand dollars for an adult and free to 15 New Zealand dollars for a child. Horse trekking, 50 New Zealand dollars to 150 New Zealand dollars. Canyoning, 150 New Zealand dollars to 300 New Zealand dollars. Hobbiton, 80 New Zealand dollars to 100 New Zealand dollars adult and free to 50 New Zealand dollars for a child. Glowworm caving, 125 New Zealand dollars to 280 New Zealand dollars. Great Walked Dock Hut/Night, 32 New Zealand dollars to 110 New Zealand dollars. Other expenses. Of course, there are other expenses to factor into your New Zealand travel budget. Some expenses are difficult to determine in this guide because they are priced on a case-by-case basis, such as flights, visas and travel insurance. Nevertheless, remember to do your own research on the following. Flight prices vary a lot, but you can find how to book a cheap flight to New Zealand on nzpocketguide.com. Visa, take a look at the Immigration New Zealand fee finder on immigration.government.nz. Zeta and IVL, this should be under 100 New Zealand dollars, but it varies as well. Travel and medical insurance, this is depending on your chosen provider and cover. That's it for this article. Hit like and subscribe to say thank you, and remember, this article is available for free on nzpocketguide.com. Check out the link in the description. Plus, there are thousands of articles for you to plan the perfect New Zealand holiday.